The Ungrateful Son. Once upon a time, a man and his wife were sitting in front of their house, ready to eat a roasted chicken. But then the man saw his old father walk towards them. He quickly hid the chicken, because he didn't want to share it with his father. The old man arrived, drank a glass of beer, and went home. The son wanted to put the roasted chicken back on the table, but when he touched it, the chicken changed into a big duck that flew into the son's face and wasn't planning on going off. When somebody tried to remove the duck viciously clung on. Nobody was allowed to touch her, and the ungrateful son had to feed her every day, otherwise she would have torn him to pieces. All of his friends tried to free him from the animal, but nothing worked. As soon as somebody tried to remove the duck would press her nails into the son's flesh, who would then scream out in pain, "Never mind, it hurts too much." It took a long time before the man started to think about the cause of this disaster, and when he finally understood what he did wrong, it took a long time for him to come to terms with it. A while later, they again sat by the front door with a roasted chicken that they were planning to eat. Again, he saw his old father walk up to them. When he came close, the son got up and walked towards him. The father startled and asked, "My son, why do you have that ugly duck on your face? Remove it." "Unfortunately," said the son, "I cannot, and nobody can." And he fell to his father's feet, confessed his greed, and asked for forgiveness. "I forgive you, my son," said the father. And in that instant, the duck turned into a roasted chicken. Together they ate the meal. "It tastes delicious," said the old man. "These chickens are roasted well." "And it tastes good to me too, because you forgave me," the son answered. A Christmas Carol. Once upon a time, there was a businessman. His name was Ebenezer Scrooge. He was not a friendly man. He was very rich, but he never spent it. You could say that he was very stingy. It was almost Christmas, but Scrooge didn't want to have anything to do with it. Nonsense, was his opinion. He had asked his bookkeeper, Bob Cratchit, to work on Christmas Eve. Together, they went through all the finances of the year until Scrooge finally let the poor man go home to his family around midnight. Then he left the office to go home himself. That evening, Scrooge got a visitor. It was his cousin, Fred. "Uncle, come to our house for Christmas dinner," asked Fred. "Oh, what rubbish!" answered Scrooge. "I hate Christmas." And that's how Scrooge, heartless, sent his nephew back into the cold. He was a tough one, this Scrooge. Even collectors for the poor were mercilessly sent away by Scrooge. "Work for your money! I do!" he yelled. And even worse, he yelled after the collectors, "The more poor people die, the better for the problem of overpopulation." That night, something remarkable happened. In his dream, Scrooge got a visit from his deceased business partner, Marley. "If you continue like this, you will haunt this earth forever, just like me, and will always be reminded of how poorly you treated others," warned Marley. He told him that he would have 3 spirits visit him who can help him be spared from this awful fate, and that's what happened that night. Scrooge was awoken by the first ghost shortly after midnight. "I am the ghost of Christmas past," said the ghost. "What are you here for?" asked Scrooge. "I want to show you memories. They are from a long time ago. You might not remember them so well. I am here to refreshen your memory," said the ghost. Scrooge saw images from his past. like when he was left lonely and abandoned by his father at a strict boarding school. He also saw the love of his life, who he had lost because he spent too much time doing business. Finally, he saw his deceased sister, who had always been kind to him. "Stop it," begged Scrooge. "I can't bear this." The ghost disappeared. An hour later, Scrooge was woken up again. It was still slightly after midnight. The second ghost appeared, the ghost of Christmas Present. Scrooge sighed. "And what are you doing here?" he asked. "I want to show you your loyal bookkeeper, Bob Cratchit, who has a tough life. He has a son. His name is Tiny Tim, who is very ill. They can't afford his medicine. You don't pay him enough for all the work that he does. It's very well possible that Tiny Tim will pass away too soon." The images touched Scrooge. There was a tear streaming down his face. When the ghost saw it, he said, "What a strange reaction. His death would be a good solution to overpopulation, right?" And for the first time in ages, Scrooge felt regret. Regret over what he had said about the poor, and regret about how he treated his loyal bookkeeper. The ghost said farewell, and the third ghost appeared, the ghost of Christmas Future. "What can I do for you?" asked Scrooge, who was overwhelmed by his feelings that he had suppressed for a long time, and had been awoken by the visits of the previous ghosts. His experiences from the past had made him a tough man, but the memories had sparked something in him. He started to regret his behavior more and more. This ghost showed him images of his grave with no visitors, and he got even sadder. It got worse when the ghost showed him the next Christmas without Tiny Tim. The sadness of the Cratchit family touched him. He became very ashamed and wished he could be as gentle and generous as when he was born. That's when Scrooge decided to change. He ordered a turkey at the butcher and had it delivered at the Cratchit family, twice the size of Tiny Tim, and they enjoyed it so much. Of course, he gave Bob a raise. Then Scrooge went to the poorhouse, where he personally apologized to the collectors and gave them a large amount of money. And that's how it happened that the cruel businessman changed into a kind and warm man. He accepted his nephew's invitation to spend Christmas with his family and had a lovely time. Scrooge became like a second father to Tiny Tim. Not only did he give the boy a lot of things, but was more important, he loved the boy. Hans in Luck. After working hard for 7 years, Hans thought it was time to quit his job and go visit his mother. He asked his boss for his paycheck. "You have always been loyal to me, and you have worked hard," answered his boss. "I am going to give you a piece of gold. You have deserved it fair and square." The piece of gold was as big as Hans's head. He wrapped the gold in a big cloth and threw it over his shoulder and went on his way. Slowly, Hans was strolling over the road when a rider on a big horse came riding by. "Hello, rider," greeted Hans cheerfully. "It must be so lovely to be riding such a beautiful animal. It won't ruin your shoes, and you won't get tired at all." The rider stopped, looked at Hans and said, "Why are you walking then?" Hans answered, "I didn't have a choice. I have to carry this big lump of gold. My neck and shoulders are hurting, but I still have a long way to go." "You know what, Hans," said the rider. "Let's trade. You get my horse, and I get your gold." "That would be great," Hans yelled. "But I have to be honest. That piece of gold is very heavy. Carrying it won't be easy." The rider mounted off his horse, took the gold, and helped Hans in the saddle. "This horse is fast. But if you want to go even faster, you yell, "Trot, trot, trot, horse going gallop," said the rider, and the two men said their goodbyes. Hans was delighted and rode on the horse in an easy pace. Then he realized he could arrive at his mother's house sooner, so he yelled, "Trot, trot, trot, horse going gallop." The horse speeded off, and Hans was thrown off the horse into a pond. The horse would have run off, but a farmer who was passing with a cow stopped it. "Oh my, farmer," spoke Hans, "I could have broken my neck. Never again shall I ride a horse. A cow seems like a better animal. You can walk safely behind it, and with its milk you can make butter and cheese." "Well," said the farmer, "if you want, we can swap animals." Hans was happy with the suggestion, so they traded. On his way home, he thought of all the advantages. "Now I have milk, and I can make yummy butter and cheese," he thought to himself, and his mouth started watering. The afternoon sun started to shine brighter and brighter, and Hans got thirsty. "Luckily, I have my cow, and I can drink its milk," he thought happily. He took off his leather hat to catch the milk in it, but no matter how hard he tried, the cow didn't give a drop. A butcher approached Hans with a wheelbarrow with a little pig. When Hans explained to him what he was doing, the butcher answered, "That cow is too old to give milk. You should butcher it for its meat." "Oh," said Hans, "a whole cow would yield a lot of meat, but I don't like the taste of beef. It's not juicy. But such a young pig, you could make a delicious sausage." "I shall do you a favor," said the butcher. "I'm willing to trade my pig for your cow." "I am so lucky," thought Hans, and he happily continued on his journey. He met a boy with a white goose. They talked for a bit, and Hans told him all about the luck that was happening to him. Then the boy told him he had heard a rumor. The pig was stolen from the mayor, which could very well be Hans's pig. "I think you have been cheated," said the boy. "I would get rid of it before you end up in jail." "Oh my goodness," thought Hans. "Thank you for warning me. I wouldn't be able to sleep peacefully if I hadn't," the boy said. "If you want, we can trade and I will hide the pig and you get my goose." "That would be great," Hans said. "I will be very grateful." And that's how Hans continued his travels with a goose under his arm. On his way, he met a knife sharpener. When he asked Hans why he was walking with a goose, Hans told him the whole story about the luck he had on his way by making good trades. The knife sharpener said to Hans that he was lucky they met. "You should become a knife sharpener, then you will always have money," he said. "The only thing you have to do is trade your goose for my rock." Hans thought it was a great idea and traded his goose for the rock. Because of the heavy rock, Hans was walking very, very slowly. He was happy to see a well. He put his rock on the edge of the well to have a sip of water. But oh no, his rock fell into the well. Never ever was Hans so happy. Now he didn't have to carry the heavy rock anymore. Happy as a clam that he was freed from the heavy burden, he continued his way home whistling and was excited to see his mother. The Golden Goose. Once upon a time, a long, long time ago, a family with 3 children lived by the edge of the woods. The youngest child was called Simpleton because the family thought he was very dumb. One day, the father asked the eldest son to go into the forest and chop some wood. His mother gave him cookies and a bottle of wine to bring along. On his way, the boy met a gnome. "What do you say, boy? Will you give me some of those cookies?" asked the gnome. "And maybe a drop of wine?" "Are you crazy?" the boy answered. "I'm going to eat and drink that all by myself. Get away." Shortly after, the eldest son started chopping wood until his arms started to hurt badly. He had to stop working and couldn't bring the wood home. The eldest son had returned home without wood, so the father sent his middle son out to do the job. He also got cookies and a bottle of wine from his mother. From a distance, the son already saw the gnome. "Good day," said the gnome. "Can I have a bit of your cookie? Maybe with a sip of wine?" "Absolutely not," said the boy. "Then I will have less to eat and drink." "That won't happen." The boy walked away. Suddenly, his legs started cramping badly and he couldn't continue. He struggled to get home and didn't bring any wood. Now the family didn't have any wood left to make a fire and cook food. So Simpleton asked his father, "Shall I go out and chop some wood?" The father thought that Simpleton wouldn't be able to do it, but the youngest son kept insisting and his father let him go. His mother gave Simpleton some old dry cookies and a small bottle of old beer. "Good day," the gnome greeted Simpleton. "Can you give me something to eat and maybe a little bit to drink? I'm so hungry and thirsty." "I only have some old cookies and a small bottle of beer," answered Simpleton. "But if you don't mind, we can eat and drink it together." The cookies tasted good, and the beer did too. "Because you have such a kind heart, and you were willing to share your food and drink with me, I shall give you luck," said the gnome. "Chop down that old tree, and between the roots you will find luck." The gnome said his goodbyes and disappeared. Simpleton chopped down the tree, and between the roots he found a goose with gold feathers. He knew he couldn't bring the goose home because his parents would take it from him. So he walked to an inn to spend the night there and to think about what he should do with the goose. The innkeeper had 3 daughters. They were eager to pluck a gold feather from the goose. When the first daughter put her fingers on a feather, her hand got stuck to the goose. The 2 other daughters wanted to try as well, and they also got stuck. The next day, Simpleton wanted to leave, but saw the 3 daughters stuck to the goose. Simpleton realized the inn wasn't safe, so he quickly left with the goose. He didn't care about the 3 daughters who were stuck to it. On their way, they met lots of people who all wanted to take a gold feather. All of them got stuck to each other and the goose. And so, a long line of people was created who were all stuck to each other. At some point, Simpleton reached a city. In the city was a palace with a king who had a daughter, who was always sad. When the princess saw the parade of stuck people, she bursted out in laughter. The king had stated that he would give the person who could make his daughter happy again a reward. He had promised that the person would marry his daughter. Simpleton was eager to marry the girl whom he had fallen deeply in love with. But Simpleton wasn't a prince, and that made the king very unhappy. So the king said, "Simpleton, you are not a prince. That's why I have to ask you to bring someone who can drink all the wine in the wine cellar in one go and eat my entire stock of bread." Simpleton quickly thought of the gnome and hurried into the woods. He saw an old man sitting there. "I'm so hungry and thirsty," said the old man. "I already drank 1 barrel of wine, but it feels like I've only had 1 sip." Simpleton asked the man to come to the palace with him. The man drank all the wine in the wine cellar and ate all the bread. But the king really didn't want Simpleton to marry his daughter. "Come back with a ship that can sail on the water and drive over land," he said, which seemed to him impossible. Then the old man changed into the gnome and said, "I drank all the wine for you, and I ate all the bread. Now I shall give you that ship. I do this because you have a kind heart." The ship appeared, and the king had to agree to the marriage. The Three Little Bears. Once upon a time, there were 3 bears. They lived together in the middle of the forest. One of the bears was an eeny-meeny tiny little bear. The second was a middle-sized bear. The third was a gigantic, huge bear. The 3 bears ate homemade porridge every morning. The little bear ate out of a little bowl. The middle-sized bear ate out of a middle-sized bowl. And the big bear ate out of a gigantic bowl. The bears each had their own chair. Naturally, the little bear had a little chair, and the middle-sized bear had a medium-sized chair. The gigantic chair was for the gigantic bear. They all slept in their own bed. The little bear slept in a little bed. The medium bear slept in a medium bed, and the big bear had an enormous bed. One day, they were making their porridge in the morning. They poured it into their bowls and went into the forest. This way, the porridge could cool off during their morning walk. While the bears were out walking, a little old woman came to the house of the bears. She peeked inside through the keyhole. Carefully, she opened the front door and peeked inside. There she saw 3 bowls with porridge on the table. This made her hungry. First, she tasted the porridge of the giant bear, but it was too hot. The porridge of the medium bear was cold. Ew! The porridge of the little bear was just right. She ate the entire bowl of porridge. The woman sat down in the chair of the big bear, but it was way too big for her. The chair of the middle-sized bear was too soft. The chair of the little bear was just right. She happily wiggled in it until she suddenly fell through the seat. The old woman then found the bedrooms with 3 beds. The big bed was way too big, and the medium bed as well. But the bed of the little bear was just right. So she lay down. It was so comfortable that she fell into a deep sleep. In the meantime, the bears had returned home. The big bear saw a spoon in his porridge, then said, "Who touched my porridge?" The medium bear also saw a spoon in her bowl and said, "Who touched my porridge?" The little bear saw that her porridge had been completely eaten and said, "Who ate my porridge?" The bears looked around and saw that someone had been sitting in their chairs. "Who sat in my chair?" asked the big bear. "Who sat in my chair?" asked the medium bear. The seat of the little chair was on the ground, and the little bear looked at it and yelled, "Who broke my chair?" The 3 bears went into the bedroom and saw that all the beds had been used and that a little woman was sleeping in the bed of the little bear. The big bear roared, "Who laid in my bed?" The medium-sized bear yelled, "Somebody also laid in my bed." The little bear yelled, "There is someone in my bed!" The old woman was so startled by the voice of the little bear that she jumped out of the window and ran. The woman had heard the voice of the big bear, but because she slept so deeply, she thought it was the wind or thunder. The voice of the medium bear made her think that she heard someone talking in her dream. It was the sharp, shrill voice of the little bear that woke her up. When she saw the 3 bears on one side of the bed, she tumbled out of the bed on the other side and jumped out of the window and ran away. The bears never saw her again. Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. In a city in Persia, very far from here, lived 2 brothers, Qasim and Ali Baba. Qasim was rich, but Ali Baba had to work hard to provide for his wife and son. One day, as he was cutting wood in the forest, he saw a group of horsemen in the distance. Quickly, Ali Baba hid in the bushes. Soon he saw that they were with no less than 40 men. The man with the finest clothing walked a little further into the bushes and called out loud and clear, "Open sesame!" A door in the rock wall opened and closed again once all the robbers were inside. Ali Baba was amazed at what he had just seen. He remained in the bush until the robbers came out again. The robber chief said, "Close sesame!" and then all 40 of them rode away. Ali Baba could not resist taking a look at the robbers' hideout. He walked up to the rock wall and said, "Open sesame!" And to his surprise, the door opened. Inside, he saw a room full of treasures. Ali Baba took as much gold as his donkeys could lift. Satisfied, he went back home. He told the story to his wife and said, "This must remain a secret." But his wife was anxious to know how much gold they had and went to borrow a scale from Kasim's wife. Because Kasim's wife wanted to know what Ali Baba had to weigh, she put a little grease in the bowl of the scale. When Ali Baba's wife came back very happy to return the scale, there was still 1 gold piece stuck to it. When Kasim heard this, he became very jealous. Angry, he went to Ali Baba. "Why are you pretending to be poor while you are weighing gold pieces?" Ali Baba decided to tell him the truth and shared the location of the cave. "We can share the treasure," he said to his brother. But Kasim did not want to share anything, and he secretly went to the cave by himself. Without any problems, Kasim entered the cave, but when he wanted to leave, he couldn't remember the spell. He tried everything, but nothing worked. A little later, the robbers arrived at the cave, and they killed Kasim. As soon as Ali Baba heard that his brother had not come home that night, he went to look for him. At the cave, he found his brother's body. He took it back to the city. Arriving at his brother's house, he said to the brave maid Morgiana, "No one must know Kasim was killed. Devise a ruse so that everyone thinks he died in bed." And so Morgiana did. They buried Kasim, and Ali Baba moved to his brother's house. Meanwhile, the robbers were furious. Since Kasim's body had disappeared, they knew that somebody else knew the location of their hideout. Therefore, the robber chief devised a ruse. He had his robbers crawl into sacks and smear them with oil. In one sack, he actually put oil. All the sacks he loaded onto mules, and so he walked to town. He found out at which house he had to be. There he stopped and asked for shelter for the night as an oil merchant. He planned to kill Ali Baba in his sleep. Morgiana had to take good care of the guest, but the oil lamp had gone out and there was no more oil in the house. So she decided to get some oil from the merchant's pockets. She immediately discovered that there were men instead of oil in the bags and understood who the merchant was. Brave as she was, she immediately devised a plan to save Ali Baba. She killed all the robbers in the bags with hot oil. As soon as the robber chief discovered this, he fled. The robber chief wanted to take revenge on Ali Baba. He devised a plan and went back to the city. Here he became friends with Ali Baba's son. He was invited by Ali Baba to a meal. "That's all right, but I won't eat salt," he said. According to an old custom, if you want to be friends with someone, you have to eat salt. When Morgiana heard this strange request, she became suspicious. After one look at the guest, she knew what was going on. She immediately recognized him as the robber chief and devised a plan to kill him. Fortunately, this worked, and Ali Baba was saved. Ali Baba was so grateful to Morgiana, and allowed her to marry his son, something that they all wanted. The secret of the cave was passed down from generation to generation, and Ali Baba's family lived happily ever after. The Big Sausage. A long, long time ago, there was a huge famine in Königsberg. In the morning, the children would get a little piece of bread and a sip of milk from their mother. And even though they were extremely hungry, they wouldn't get anything more before supper. It hurt Mother to see her children like that, but there just wasn't any more food. Rats and mice, cats and dogs were already eaten, and there was no hope for better days. To make matters worse, it rained all summer, so there was no harvest from the field. Nowhere were children cheering. Nowhere were children playing happily. Nowhere happy faces to be seen. Everyone was sad. All the shops were closed, and the once busy streets were deserted. It was all gloom and doom. In these hard times, the eldest and wisest people from the city came together to discuss. The famine had to end. Every attendee came with a suggestion, but nothing seemed good enough. A month passed without finding a solution. That's when the wisest of them all stood up and said, "Because of all the misery, people have become despondent. It's our duty to cheer them up, to make them forget about the hard times." The other attendees agreed, and it was decided that from the last coins in the town treasury, a big sausage would be made, and every citizen would get a piece. Well, Königsberg is right by the sea, so two people went on a boat to get pigs, pepper, salt, and other spices, because near the city nothing could be found. After a few weeks, they returned with ships full of food. All the butchers in town had to come to City Hall and got to order to make one big sausage. The butchers did it with pleasure. Within a month, they had made a sausage like no one had ever seen before. In front of the town gate, a big party terrain was set up. Big poles with flowers and colorful flags gave it a festive atmosphere. And there was a huge table on which they would put the sausage. And that was a hell of a job. A long row of two people, side by side, carried the sausage on big sticks to the table. In front were town musicians with a drum, trumpet, and flute. After that, the mayor and members of the council. And to close it off, the cheering people of the city. Once they arrived at the terrain, the sausage was put down and the musicians played cheerful music. After, the mayor held a speech and the school children sang songs. Then they started to divide the sausage. You should have seen the happy faces the kids had. Because when you haven't eaten well in a long time, it is a joy to be able to eat as much as you want, especially for kids. After everyone was done eating, a lot of sausage was still left. Everybody was allowed to take as much sausage home as they could carry. It took 2 whole days and nights to cut up and divide the sausage. When that was done, the citizens had hope again for the future. The children were laughing and got to be happy again. The next year, the harvest was successful and the famine ended. Everywhere in the world, the story of the big sausage of Königsberg is told to children, and whoever hears it starts mouth-watering. The old man who made withered trees blossom. Once upon a time, a long, long time ago, by the river lived 2 old men. One lived upstream and the other downstream. That's why they were called upstream and downstream. The big difference between the 2 neighbors was that upstream was a selfish, nasty man, and Downstream friendly and generous. One day, both men put a fish trap in the river. The first thing the next morning, impatient Upstream went to check the trap, but there were only twigs in his trap. Immediately, he wanted to know if his neighbor had the same bad luck, but to his surprise, the trap of Downstream was full of fish. Quickly, Upstream changed traps with his neighbor. When Downstream went to check his trap, he saw the strange catch. But he didn't mind, because now he didn't have to go and chop wood. When he tried to chop a big willow root into smaller chunks, to his surprise, it just fell apart. What was even stranger was that a little dog jumped out of it. Downstream and his wife took good care of the dog. Even though they had little food, they always gave half to the dog. The dog soon became big and strong. One morning, the dog said with a human voice, "Father, come join me in the forest today. Tie a basket on my back and we can go." Downstream was dumbfounded, but he listened to the dog and they left together. The old man got tired quickly. The dog saw this and said, "You have always taken such good care of me. Put the things you are holding into my basket, and you also climb in. I can carry you." The old man resisted for a moment, but soon obliged. On their way, the dog and Downstream shared the food he had brought. A little while later, the dog stood still. "Father, here you should dig." And the man started to dig. To his surprise, he found a pot full of gold. Over the moon, he brought it home to his wife. Shortly after, their neighbor Upstream found out about their luck. He asked if he could borrow their dog, and kind as Downstream was, he agreed. But Upstream was very mean to the dog. He sat on the dog's back without asking and gave it no food. So instead of leading him to a pot of gold, the dog led Upstream to a pot of trash. Upstream got so angry that he killed the dog. Downstream and his wife were heartbroken and made the sweet dog a beautiful grave. They put a willow branch on the grave so that they would always be able to find it. But the branch didn't remain a branch. Within a year, it had grown into a beautiful big tree. Downstream enjoyed sitting underneath the tree. On a warm autumn day, he suddenly heard the voice of his dog from within the tree. "Cut down this tree and turn it into a mortar for the rice." The old man immediately obeyed. He would have a nice keepsake to remember his dog by. When the mortar was done, he gave it to his wife. She put a little rice in it, and to her surprise, the amount of the rice doubled. It turned into so much rice that it was streaming down onto the ground. At that moment, the wife of Upstream knocked on the door. She saw the rice and wanted to try out the magic mortar. She took the mortar home and put rice in it. But instead of doubling the amount of rice, it started to get less and less. This made Upstream so angry that he chopped the mortar into pieces and burned it. When Downstream came to collect his mortar, he was shocked to hear what his neighbors had done with his keepsake. He asked if they had kept the ashes and took those home. As he was walking home, a gust of wind swept some of the ashes into the garden. And everywhere where the ashes hit the trees started blooming. "I have to show this to the king," he thought. The king was known for his love of the blossoms of the cherry blossom trees. He would surely love this. In the royal garden, Downstream ran into the king. "I am the old man who lets trees blossom," he said. The king was eager to see it for himself. Downstream threw some ashes onto the trees, and indeed they started blooming. The king thought it was so beautiful that he rewarded Downstream with beautiful clothing. When Upstream heard about this, he became jealous again. He took some of the ashes and brought it to the queen. "I am the man who lets trees bloom," he said. "In exchange for beautiful clothes, I will make the entire garden blossom." He threw the ashes into the trees, but nothing happened. What did happen was that a small part of the ashes blew into the eye of the queen, who started crying in pain. Immediately, 2 big guards arrested the nasty old man and threw him in jail, where he would stay for the rest of his life. The Christmas Masquerade. It was Christmas Eve. 3 months ago, the mayor had ordered to have pamphlets hung throughout the city with a call to all children from the city to come to his Christmas masquerade. The mayor had promised to reimburse the cost for all the poor children whose parents weren't able to pay for the party. The pamphlets were up for just a week when a new store opened in town. It was soon clear that this was a professional shopkeeper. His costumes were divine. The man himself was small, with cheeks as red as roses. He wore a white wig with long curls and a suit made out of red velvet. He sat on a big stool behind his counter and helped his customers himself. He didn't have any help. It didn't take long before the children discovered all the beautiful things he had and how well his costumes were made in comparison to other stores. Customers were coming in and out of his shop, from the mayor's daughter to the children from the orphanage. What stood out was that many rich children chose costumes that were in regards to a simple life, like a costume of a goose herder or a farmer. The poor kids took their opportunity to be a princess or a fairy for a couple of hours. On Christmas Eve, the house of the mayor was filled with dressed-up children. It was remarkable how real it all looked. The little fairies with silk skirts and fine wings really did look like magical creatures. And you couldn't picture anymore that in reality it was the daughter of a maid or the son of a laundress. The mayor's daughter had picked the costume of a goose herder. She was hard to recognize. Usually, she was a slim, gracious young lady who was tall for her age. Now, she looked a bit ragged, like she was used to herding geese in any weather. And it was like that with all the children. The Red Riding Hoods were looking around with big, fearful eyes, wary of the big bad wolf. The princesses held their heads high and made others effortlessly believe that they were real princesses. The kids were having fun like never before. The mayor contentedly watched from the dining table. Next to him was his beautiful eldest daughter, Violetta. She wore a white dress and had a hat made out of blue violets. After the evening meal, everybody went home satisfied. But shortly after, something strange happened. When the proud parents tried to unbutton their kids' clothes, they couldn't do it. The buttons quickly buttoned themselves up again. This made the parents worry, but the kids were so tired that they climbed into bed in their costumes. The parents thought that maybe they would have more luck in the morning. But the next morning, around 12 in the afternoon, a big wave of panic came over the city. Nobody was able to take the costumes off. And that wasn't even the worst thing. Each of the children seemed to have taken over the personality of their costumes. The mayor's daughter insisted on herding her geese in the meadow. The princess demanded to be brought back to her castle. Red Riding Hood was crying because she wanted to bring her basket with cookies to her grandma. The parents were in an uproar. They gathered at the new shopkeeper's store because everybody thought that he was responsible for what was happening. The shop was closed and the shopkeeper had disappeared with all of his belongings. The mayor quickly gathered his council for an emergency meeting. They proposed to be advised by the wise woman. That was what the old woman was called who lived alone with her black cat in a small cabin at the edge of the city. She was very old and had raised a large amount of children. That's why she was looked at as very wise. So the councilman went to visit her. But the woman had turned deaf and she didn't understand or hear what the councilman wanted from her. The only one who had a loud voice was the soprano singer from the church choir. The man called for the singer and brought her to the wise woman. The singer sang the whole story close to her ear and she understood every word. Go home and give the kids a spoon of castor oil, was the advice of the wise woman. The councilman went through the city to give every child a spoon of castor oil. But it didn't help. The children were protesting loudly when they were forced to drink the nasty oil. And directly after, the chimney sweepers cried for their brooms, the goose herder for her geese, and the princesses for their castles. The mayor and the council were very indignant and went with the singer to the house of the wise woman. "You are a fraud," said one of them, "and that's why we strongly urge you to leave your house and the city." The black cat started hissing. The old woman cast a spell, and instead of one cat, 125 cats were standing and hissing. The mayor and the council quickly left. They couldn't fight that many cats. Winter came around and the situation in the city worsened. Doctors were consulted and even the police were called, but nobody was able to help the children. Violetta, the eldest daughter of the mayor, suddenly thought about the cherry man. He lived far away from the city, but she knew he was very smart. He took care of the cherry trees and brought the cherries to the city to sell. Not only did she think he was smart, but also gorgeous and charming. Maybe he would be able to help? One day she went to visit him and told him the whole story. "What does the shopkeeper look like?" he asked. He thought Violetta was the most beautiful girl in the world. Violetta described the shopkeeper. "I know where he is," said the cherry man. "He lives in one of the cherry trees and doesn't want to come down." Violetta ran to her father. The mayor called the council together and they left together to the cherry tree. When they arrived, they saw the shopkeeper sitting on one of the highest branches in the tree. Whatever they tried, they couldn't get the man down. They even tried to chop down the tree, but they couldn't. The shopkeeper was sitting in the tree eating cherries until he stood up and started to speak. "I shall release your city and the costumes can be removed, but on 2 conditions. The mayor said, "Fine, let's hear it." The shopkeeper continued, "This party you threw for rich and poor was a good idea, but I think it will only happen once or twice more. Your successors shall probably not continue the tradition. That's why I want a law in place that makes sure that all poor children get a stocking on Christmas filled with beautiful gifts." The mayor promised to put the law in place. "And what is your second condition?" he asked. "The second condition," said the shopkeeper, "is that this good cherry man shall marry your eldest daughter Violetta. He has been kind to me. He let me live in his cherry tree and let me eat the cherries. I want to reward him for this." At first, the mayor didn't agree, but his desire to bring his youngest daughter back to her old self was bigger. At home, all the children were released from their costumes, the law was passed, and was lived up every Christmas. Violetta and the Cherry Man wanted to marry each other. All the children came to the wedding and threw flowers. The shopkeeper had disappeared mysteriously from the cherry tree the night before, but at the bottom of the tree he had left beautiful wedding gifts, silver cutlery, and porcelain tableware with hand-painted cherries. The Big Claus and the Little Claus. Long ago, in a village far away, there lived two people with the same name. That is why they called one Big Claus and the other one Little Claus. Big Claus had 4 horses, and Little Claus had only 1. During the week, Little Claus had to help Big Claus with plowing. On Sundays, Little Claus could borrow the 4 horses of Big Claus to plow his land. Every time someone walked by, Little Claus shouted, "Up, my horses!" So everyone thought he had 5 horses. Big Claus said, "Don't tell other people they are your horses, or I'll kill your horse." But Little Claus couldn't help himself, so Big Claus beat Little Claus's horse to death. Little Claus looked at it with an open mouth. "Now I have no horse," he cried. In order to have something to show for his horse, Little Claus went to town to sell the horsehide. On the way, he came to a farm where he wanted to spend the night, but the farmer's wife sent him away. Disappointed, Little Claus looked around and decided that he could sleep on the roof of the barn. From the roof, Little Claus could see into the farmhouse. There sat the farmer's wife and the sexton at a set table. The most delicious dishes were on the table. Then the farmer came home. "Hey, what are you doing on that roof? Come inside the house." The farmer's wife quickly hid the delicious food and had the sexton crawl into a coffin. Her husband hated sextons. Inside, the farmer and Little Claus were given a large plate of porridge. The farmer started to eat, but Little Claus thought of the delicious food. He kicked the bag with the horsehide and it squeaked. He said, "Be quiet," but at the same time he kicked the bag again. "What's in that sack?" the farmer asked. "Oh, that's a magician," said Little Claus. "He says he has conjured the whole oven full of delicious food and drinks." The farmer immediately went to see and could not believe his eyes. The farmer's wife did not dare to say anything. Many glasses of wine later, the farmer asked, "Can your magician conjure up the devil? I'd like to see him." "Of course," said Little Claus, "but he looks like a sexton." "Good that you warned me, because I hate sextons, but I am curious." "Then look in the coffin." And so the farmer did, and he was startled, for there indeed was a sexton there. Impressed, the farmer said, "You must sell me that magician. I'll give you a lot of money for it." So Little Claus left the farm a lot richer than when he arrived. With his cart full of money, Little Claus drove past the house of Big Claus. "How did you get to be so rich?" "That's what I got for my horse skin, which I sold yesterday." Big Claus wanted that too, so he killed his own horses and went to town with the skins. But no matter how hard he tried, no one would pay that much for the skins. Angry, Big Claus returned home. "You tricked me, and now my horses are dead," he shouted at Little Claus. He picked up Little Claus and put him in a bag. "Now I will drown you." But the way to the river was long and the sack was heavy, so Big Claus stopped at a church. While he was inside, an old drover came by. His cattle ran over the sack with Little Claus. I am so young, and I have to die already, cried Little Claus. And I'm so old, and I'm still not allowed to go to heaven, said the drover. We should swap. And so they did. Little Claus quickly ran on with the cattle, and the old drover was thrown into the river by Big Claus. Not much later, Big Claus came across Little Claus with his cattle. Big Claus didn't understand a thing. Little Claus should have drowned. I did drown, but these are water cattle. That's what I got when I hit the bottom of the river. That is what Big Claus wanted too, so he voluntarily crawled into a bag and let himself be drowned into the river by Little Claus. He sank to the bottom immediately. I don't think you will find any cattle, thought Little Claus, and he walked home, satisfied with his new possession.